Hello, and welcome to JavaScript Marathon, a full day of free online courses in some of the leading web development technologies and concepts. Special thanks to our sponsor today, This.Labs, offering personalized training programs to suit your organizational needs, ensuring you and your company stay on the leading edge. If you find keeping up with constantly evolving technologies a struggle and want to bring your team up to speed on one of the latest technologies, contact us today at hi@this.co to set up your complimentary needs assessment. Also, This.Labs is hiring. If you're looking for a new job, send us your info at jobs@this.co. Work with a number of great clients, and I bet you would enjoy working with them as well. Before we get started, here are a couple of exciting online events we're hosting in the next couple of months, including State of UI on July 27th at 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 p.m. Eastern Time. Join us live to have a chance to hear important updates within the community and the chance to ask any questions that you would like. Find out more information and register for the link to watch at this.media.com. Also, JavaScript Marathon is back in September. Stay tuned for updates at javascriptmarathon.com. Hello, everyone. I am your trainer for today. I'm Lindsay Wardell, software engineer at This.Labs. Today, we'll be learning about the View Composition API. And as part of that, we will be migrating a simple application from the Options API, most common in Vue 2, to the Composition API, which was introduced with Vue 3. If you have any questions after today, feel free to message me on Twitter at Lindsay K. Wardell. So let's start talking about the Composition API. First off, this is just a new syntax for organizing Vue components. If you've worked with Vue in the past, you're very familiar with what's called the Options API, where when you're creating a single file component, you create an object that has a data property, methods, computed, watch, mounted, all the lifecycle hooks. And that's how Vue has worked in the past. The Composition API is just a new syntax for organizing those same concepts. Rather than grouping our code by the function of what it does, for example, data is where all of our state is managed, or computed, where all of the values are computed ahead of time and then cached within the Vue runtime. We are grouping our code by the feature. So instead of thinking of it as these are my computed properties, these are my methods that I have access to, you're grouping code by this is all of the code related to this functionality in my application. One of the benefits of that is you're then able to organize large files, large Vue components, in a way that's a lot more readable instead of having to jump between multiple lines just to understand the code. The other benefit of this not needing to jump is if you need to extract any of that logic into, for example, a mixin in the past, you're able to use the Vue Composition API and extract it directly into an understandable format that's the same as if you were using it in the component, and then just import that file and use those methods that you create yourself. Another large benefit of learning the Composition API, not necessarily just using it, but understanding it, is that it will be compatible with Vue 2. There is currently a Vue 2 plugin. If you want to install it, it's at Vue/Composition API on NPM. And that lets you implement the Vue Composition API in Vue 2. You can use it today in your existing applications. You don't need to upgrade to Vue 3 to do it. If you're writing library code that wants to rely on the Composition API, you can use something like Vue Demi, which lets you at runtime determine whether you are running inside of a Vue 3 environment or a Vue 2 environment and import the correct Composition API methods depending on the environment that you're in. You're not reliant on saying this is a Vue 3 only library, which is a great benefit for any library developers. Obviously, that's less important if you are writing an application yourself. Also, in Vue 2.7, which is an upcoming release, hasn't come out yet, there's a lot of backported capabilities from Vue 3 that will be in Vue 2, including the Composition API. So learning the composition API now, before that happens, will be a great benefit if you're on a Vue 2 application that is not able to upgrade to Vue 3 or take that migration path. So let's get started exploring our demo application here. If my computer will agree with me. That is the wrong button. There it is. So here is our demo application for today. And this is a very simple, there is no backend here. We're just pretending to sign in. This is a very simple demo where we sign in. No Firefox, I don't want to save that. And we have a simple to-do app with a logout button. So if we want to add a to-do, we can say first to-do. Hooray, there's our first to-do. I can check it off. Let's add a second one first. And so I can check off the first to-do. I can erase the second one if necessary. Up here, we've got a computed property saying how many to-dos we have and how many are completed of the ones that are displayed, or of all of them, sorry. And then we can show and hide completed as necessary. So let's add first to-do again. So we've added our first to-do. There it is. Hooray. Everything is working as expected. And the logout button just takes us back to the login page. So that is our application. And what we're going to do today is explore upgrading this application from the Options API to the Composition API and have a discussion along the way of how that works and why we would do certain, or why we would make certain decisions as we're doing that. Before we begin, I want to stress that you do not need to upgrade to the Composition API. The Options API, as it exists in Vue 2 and Vue 3, will continue to be supported. And in most cases, it's going to be what you want when writing a Vue application. This is purely an example so that you can understand the Composition API and when you would want to use it. One of the benefits I didn't mention yet is that you can use the Composition API with the Options API together. There's nothing saying you have to use one or the other within a component. You can use both. If you want to write a mixin, for example, that uses the Composition API rather than the mixin syntax so that you get proper typing, and VS Code, for example, would have the correct understanding of what's being done inside of your component, you can do that. You can use the Composition API to create that mixin. It's not a literal mixin in Vue's terminology, but it performs the same function. So I would definitely recommend learning the Composition API at minimum just to be able to do that. And then if you're working with larger Vue components and it would help to break things up by feature, it's a perfect opportunity. This application is purely an example, and we'll be going over why you would want to use the Composition API, or how to use the Composition API in certain circumstances. So let's take a look at the code. So this is a very basic Vue CLI application. We have two views. Our main app file looks like a normal app file, brings in a layout. We have our login page with a basic form, and we've got some data, we've got some methods, we have them mounted. On the home page, we've got a couple components here. We have an add to do component, and we have our actual to do component, which renders the list. And then we have our completed to do count. And if we go down, we'll see data and computed, methods. And then just to round out our components that we've got, here is our add to do form. Again, just a very basic form, the data property and a method. And we are using Vuex and VueRouter in this demo application, so we'll see how to work with those. We've got the layout component, and all the layout component is really doing is watching this is logged in getter from Vuex. And if we're logged in, then it will push us to the home page. If we log out, it'll push us to the login page. And then our to-do itself, which has the input for the text field, the text itself, or sorry, this is not the text field, this is a checkbox. And then there's the text itself and the button if we want to remove it to do. And this is just working on props and methods against Vuex. So the component itself is very straightforward. So let's begin. And first thing we're going to do to explore the composition API is look at the login page. And by the way, for any of you watching live, feel free to ask any questions and I will answer them as we go or at the end, depending on what kind of question it is. So let's start working on the login page and start doing some refactor. The first thing we're going to do is create our setup function. With the composition API, rather than having everything in its own little block, because we're not using options, we're not using the different keys on an object, we're just using a single function to set up everything. And we need to handle this login state of username and password. We need to handle viewX with this map actions. And we need to have this login handler. And last, we need to have our mounted hook, which will check to see if we're already logged in. In this case, we're just using local storage to see if we're logged in. Obviously, in a full application, you would potentially do something else. You might go straight through viewX to do this kind of check. In our demo example, I wanted to use the mounted hook in this way. So first, we're going to get this state taken care of. And for that, we're going to use a piece of composition API that is called reactive. And reactive basically replicates the concept here that we have in data, where there is an object, and the values within this object are going to trigger re-renders in the view template whenever they change. So we're going to bring in reactive from view. And then in setup, we will say const login state equals reactive. And now we have a reactive object. And we'll say username. I do have GitHub Copilot on if you're interested. So it might be giving some suggestions on username and password being stored there. And if we just return so let's see, we'll get to that in just a second. So now we have our login state. And this is taken care of. So I'm just going to delete that altogether so we don't have to look at it. Next, we need to handle our methods. We have two methods. One is being brought in from map actions, and one is the login handler itself. So instead of using map actions in this case, Vuex provides us with a composition hook that is use store. So I will just put this right above our login store. Const store equals use store. That gives us access to our Vuex store. And if you're using Typescript, and if you watched my previous JS Marathon talk, you know how to type this store object to actually handle all of your actions and mutations in a very type-friendly way. But for now, we can see that it's a type of store. So as we're using it, TypeScript and VS Code will be able to tell us some of the basics of how Vuex works, just from that basic typing. And now we need to write our login handler. So function login handler. And all it's going to do is store.dispatch login. And in this case, we can just pass in the login store, because the reactive object is just an object. Why is it complaining about that? Oh, login state, sorry. So because this reactive object is just an object and it's right there, we don't need to worry about, like we're doing down here with this dot username or this dot password. We can just pass the object around because we're not dealing with the magical this that Vue has. This is one of the huge benefits of the composition API, in my opinion, if you do want to use it across an application, just without the special cases. It helps so much with eliminating some of the magic that Vue had with this dot something being available or not available, as the case may be. Anything that you declare in this setup function, it's just there. It's just JavaScript as we can just use like normal. So that's our login handler, which is a lot simpler. And now we've dealt with our methods. because we're bringing in the store directly, we have access to dispatch and commit and getters and state, just like we would within Vuex itself. We're not doing the map actions or map getters in this sense, but we don't need to because we have access directly to the store. So now we're going to erase this methods block because that is done. And now we just have this mounted. And for mounted, I'm going to take out our extra import here now. For mounted, there is an on-mounted composition API hook that we can use. So we will say on-mounted. On-mounted takes a function. And we're just going to copy this code for the most part. And so if local storage get item username, we don't need this in this case. All we need is the login state. And I have caps lock on login state because we're just modifying the login state that was previously created. And we don't need to worry about this again. Local storage.get item username. Then instead of this .login handler, all we have to say is login handler. And with that, our mounted is complete. John M asked, so map functions are pretty much gone with composition API. Not 100% certain what you're referring to. If we wanted to do an array map, for example, we can still do that within the setup function. Would you mind clarifying your question a little? I'll watch the chat as we keep going. So at this point, our login is completely handled. The only thing we need to do at this point is return. Because anything that we declare in the setup function, it's great. It's right here. It's not available in the template, and it's not available in the rest of the Vue component yet. So what we need to do at this point is return. And then we return our login handler. And we need to return the state that we had, the login state. So in this case, rather than just returning like username login state username, what we could do, we have two options. We could just return the login state directly, but then we would also have to say login state.username up here. And that's a little annoying. So what we're going to do instead is use another method provided by Vue 3, which is called toRefs. And what toRefs does in our situation here is it takes the reactive component, or not the reactive component, sorry, the reactive object that we have and converts it to a number of ref components, or not components, ref values. So we're going to spread that, and we're going to say toRefs login state. What this allows us to do, so first off, if we were to do this in the setup function itself, and I'm just going to say values equals toRefs login state. So values now has username string, password string, great. And if I wanted to access one of those, values.username.value, because it is a ref. And with refs in the Vue 3 composition API, you need to access them username.value. This still triggers all the reactivity that we want. It's just a different syntax for handling. It'd be more like a single value. We'll be coming more to refs in another one of the components coming up. But in the template, we don't need to worry about that dot value. It extracts that for us, some nice Vue magic that's going on. So we can just return toRefs login state. It will pass a number of refs as it defined in our reactive object, and pass them into our template. So our template never has to change. Input type text, vmodel username, that just works now. And our login page is done. Map helpers, oh, map actions, map mutations, yes. So yes, using the composition API, I've never had to use those map functions. I just use the useStore method to access my store and my component. And then I do .dispatch.commit as needed. Yeah, I haven't had any need for map actions, map mutations, map getters, map state, any of those. Great question. All right, so step 2 in our conversion to use the composition API is going to be the home page. You're welcome. So again, the first thing we're going to need to do is look at our template. The goal here is we're never changing the template itself. Everything in the composition API should be able to work just fine without changing any of this. So we'll go down here into our component code itself. Okay, we've got data, we've got some computed properties, and we have a couple methods, one of which is brought in by Vuex. So let's just start the same way we did. We'll create our setup function. And then we will, let's see. So we've got show completed false. In this case, so we could do const state equals reactive show completed false. We could do something like that to replicate this concept of data. But then we're also having to say state.this, state.that as we're working. I don't want to do that in this case. Instead, I'm going to do const show completed equals ref false. So this goes back to that concept of refs that we were just talking about. So ref is another type of state that we can use in a Vue 3 composition API. And that just holds the value. It's a ref of Boolean if you're using TypeScript. So as we're working with it, we'll say show completed dot value to get its actual value. And that's why we can say const, even though it's a single value and we could be changing it. It's going to act as an object and be reactive in that way. So the first thing we did is show completed. Now we don't need that block. Let's look at our computed. So let's get our to-dos. The first thing we're going to need is that use store hook that we used before. Const store equals use store. Now we have access to Vuex. Hooray! And so we have to-dos here. Well, let's do that. So to make computed work, we import a method called computed from Vue. And we want to call it to-dos, right? Const to-dos equals computed. Computed is a function that takes a function. And then we are going to return store.getters because we're accessing it just like we normally would within Vuex. Get to-dos dot filter. And then I'm just going to copy this code here. Just like that. And instead of this dot show completed, we say show completed dot value. So that's how we're using our ref within the logic here, show completed dot value, like we've been talking about. And that's all we had to do there for to-dos. That works just the same as our computed property here. And again, because we're bringing in the store directly, we didn't need to worry about map getters. We just have access to get to-dos right there. We'll do the same thing now for to-do count. To-do count. We will use a computed property. Oops. And it knows exactly what I want to do, basically. Except we're going to be going from store.getters get to-dos dot length. And if you're looking at these computed properties that we're using, it looks very similar to what we're doing in the computed block in an options API. We're creating a function and we're returning a value. And it's the exact same concept that we do in both. With a computed composition API, we have a function that returns a value. So conceptually, they're the same thing. And really, the computed composition API method is the same thing that Vue is using under the hood. So we can keep going here. We can continue our completed to-do count. Is equal to computed. And we want store.getters get to-dos. I pressed a button. Dot filter. If you spell filter right, it works better. And again, I'm just going to copy our filter here for simplicity and showing that it works how you would expect. To do completed dot length. Great. So our completed to do count now works exactly the same as down here because we're getting it from the store and then we're filtering on whether it's completed. And with that, we have finished migrating our computed block, and we will erase that. I declared computed twice. Are you talking about how we're using it multiple times here? The question from John was, I noticed you declare computed twice. Any way to group the functions? We will get to grouping some functions, but in this case, this is what we would do with the composition API. Is each computed property. Yeah. So you're going to use the computed property just once, or not just once. We're going to use it each time we need a computed value, because we're calling a function to generate that computed value. So each one of these is firing separately. If you want to group all of the computeds in a single way, the options API is still an excellent way to do that. And like I was saying, you can combine. So in our component here, if you wanted to leave the computed properties just like this, but do other things within setup, you can do that. It's not what I would recommend in this case, but you can. And we'll get to some ideas on how to combine all of these things together a bit more. Right now, I'm just showing some of the functionality. So we've got our three computeds, and we've got our state, and we've got our Vuex store. Now we need to convert the methods. And in this case, the method is very simple. It's just a logout handler. So function logout handler. And all we're going to do is exactly what it said there. Store.dispatch logout, because that's all we need to do. And we can get rid of that. And now we have migrated this entire component over to the composition API. So we'll just return our values so they're accessible in the template. So the first thing we'll return is store or show completed, not store. Show completed, to-dos, completed to-do count, oops, and logout handler. And we can remove map actions and map getters from our Vuex import. So all we did is change the logic here within the JavaScript. The template remains the same, and the template continues to function as we would expect. So now we're going to move to our to-do component. So this has been the views, and we're a little more high level. Now we're going to go to the to-do component. And as we talked about, this is actually a very simple component. If you are actually wanting to migrate an application to the composition API, I would personally say don't touch this one. This works perfectly fine as is. There's no real benefit to migrating to the composition API here. We will do it just for the sake of completion and walking through how to do everything. But if you're doing this yourself, I wouldn't do it. So let's just keep going. We're going to bring in the store. And we're going. So one thing to keep in mind with the composition API, we're still leaving props. If you're using composition API, props is still the way to define what props you have available. I believe there's another way with a function called define props, but there's no real benefit to using one way or the other in a standard component. So I would just use props. It's a very straightforward way to declare everything. So we will do setup. And to access those props, our setup function's first argument is props. And if you're using VS Code or a similar TypeScript empowered IDE, you can see that to-do and index actually have TypeScript values. So to-do is a record of string or any. index is a number, which is wonderful. So in this component, all we're really doing is mapping toggle to do and remove to do into the components up there, or the template up there. So what we're going to do is some very basic things. And I'm actually just going to copy and paste this one. So we get access to our store, and then we return toggle to do, which is a function. And just to show that we're accessing the value, I added this console.log. And we'll see this at the end. I'll run the application again once we're finished migrating. But you'll be able to see toggling to do, hooray, remove to do, removing to do, hooray. And with that, we don't need this methods block. And we need use store, not store. And we don't need map actions. So this is how you would access the props if you're using the composition API. Because again, we don't have access to this. We need some way to get to these kinds of things. And then we're just using vuex, store.dispatch, store.dispatch. Not a super exciting component. I just wanted to explain how props work. And nothing changes in the template still. So now we're going to refactor the add to do component. And add to do is also fairly straightforward. We have a data property, and we have two methods. One is being mapped in with add to do. The other is a method to add to do handler. So we've already seen most of this, so I'll just move a little faster. We're going to use a ref because we only have a single value we need to track, new to do text. We're going to bring in use store, just like we have been. Setup. My keyboard will rebel because it wants to tell me type hintings. So first const store equals use store. Const new to do text equals ref, which just takes an empty string for now. And then function add to do handler. If new to do text dot value, because it is a ref, we need to access the value of that ref with dot value. Dot trim returns. We don't accidentally add any empty strings to our store. This dot add, and we know that's the wrong one. I'm looking at my hints to remember what I'm doing. Store dot dispatch, just like it's saying add to do. But instead of an object, we're just going to pass in new to do text dot value. And that's it. And then we return new to do text and add to do handler. And one of the nice things, again, this is more of a VS Code benefit, but it sees, because we're using the setup here with the composition API, it sees that we're already returning new to do text and the add to do handler, and it will complain that the keys are duplicated, which is awesome. I'm using Viter and Volar, two plugins for VS Code. So one of those two is providing this hinting for me, and I just love working with that. So we've finished the migration here, and we can erase that. And we can erase our map actions. So this component was fairly straightforward, just the store and the ref and our method. And then we return those values so that they are accessible in the template. That's really all we need to do here. There is just one last change to make, and then we have finished migrating our application. And that is our layout. So the layout itself is, again, pretty straightforward. There's a computed property, which is just from map getters, and a watch. Now there's two ways that we can do watch using the composition API. So this is going to be a little more interesting. So first, we're going to bring in our store, use store. Another interesting piece here is that we're using the router with this dot router. So we need to bring in the router as well. And the Vue router compatible with Vue 3 has its own function, use router. So we have access to use store to access the store, use router to get to the router. Let's get started. So setup, just like we've done. And then we want const store equals use store. Const router equals use router. Now we have access to both. Const is logged in is equal to computed, which takes a function, store.getters.is logged in. Great, so now we have a computed property for is logged in. And one interesting thing to note, and we'll be seeing this in just a moment, is logged in is a computed ref. So if you want that value, you're going to need to watch, or you're going to need to access is logged in dot value, just like we've done on the other computed properties, or not on the other refs, I should say. So there's two ways, like I said, that we can do this. First is going to be watch like we normally would do in Vue. So here, for example, in our watch, we have is logged in, which is a function, and then we just start working with it. If this dot is logged in, do something else, do something else. And if you're familiar with Vue 2, you also know that if we wanted to, this could be an object where we do things like immediate true, deep true, and handler, which is the actual function. And I just blew everything up on my keyboard. I apologize. So you could do a handler where it's the actual function. We're not going to worry about any of those right now, but it's just a normal watch, right? So we're going to do something very similar with the composition API, where we just use watch. In this case, we're going to watch is logged in, which takes a function of is logged in. And just like with the options API, if we wanted to see the current value, that's the current value. If we wanted to see the previous value, we have access to the previous value. We're not going to worry about that right now because it doesn't matter as much. And we can just access things like this. If, actually, we don't need that computed property for, yes, we do, never mind. If is logged in, dot value. Do it. Oh, no, we don't, because this has the value we want. This is the ref, but because we're watching it, it's getting pulled out right there, I believe. At least that's what my demo previously was working with. So then we can just do router.push. Hooray, else. Router.push login. Great. So that's what we would need to do for watch. And it didn't auto import. That's part of the problem. Great. So if we're logged in, we go one way, otherwise we go the other. And that's fairly standard for how Vue does watchers anyway, which is nice. The other way we could do this, I will comment this out for now, is watch effect. Now, watch effect is a little bit more like if you're familiar with React, where it has the use effect and just something happens. Or, for example, with a computed property in Vue, where anything inside of the function triggers the thing to happen. So watch effect is pretty nice. So we'll do a watch effect here. And that just takes a function. And all we have to do is if is logged in dot value. I think. Hold on. Sorry. Yeah. Dot value. Router.push. Else router.push to login. And this is a lot nicer when working with the composition API, because you don't have to declare what specifically you're watching. Sometimes you'll run into those situations where you need to watch 2 or 3 different values and then perform the exact same effect, right? I end up with this a lot sometimes with forms, where I'm watching for particular different inputs and then triggering responses and side effects because of that. So watch effect lets you get around that pretty nicely. And that's all we need to do for that. We can do either the watch or the watch effect. In this case, for our demo, I'll be using watch effect. So let's jump over and see if everything still works. I'm going to sign in. Hooray, we're signed in. And we'll add a to-do. Hooray, that still works. Though it didn't clear, but that's because we forgot that piece of code, I bet. Second to-do. And then we can mark those as completed. Show completed, everything is completed. We'll release our second to-do. Everything is working as expected. So there was one bug that I just want to fix, if you will indulge me, because this was supposed to new to-do dex.value equals empty. That way, as we add new to-dos, it clears out the field. Just a small thing. So that's how to migrate an application to the composition API using a very basic example. And we've gone through all of the different components, and they all now use the composition API instead of options API. We've looked at the most common information, like the lifecycle hooks on mounted. We've used ref, we've used reacted, computed, the two different kinds of watchers. We've used Vuex, we've used the router. That covers most of your use cases for the composition API. But let's look at one additional thing. One of the nice pieces of the composition API that we mentioned at the beginning is that we can extract the logic from our component if it's something that needs to be used in multiple places. This can be especially useful if you have a mix-in type piece of logic where you need to use it across multiple components. Mark is asking, so is Vue composition API similar to React hooks? Yes, in many ways it is similar to the React hooks way of thinking. One key piece to keep in mind, if you're comparing React and Vue in this case, is that the setup function only fires once. It's not the same kind of render function that React uses where it will trigger every single time. It will only ever fire once. And then those values are reactive. And that's because Vue uses proxies for its reactivity engine. And it will just start watching for those, or it won't be watching. If any of the refs or the reactive elements or the computed properties are changed and updated, that will trigger a re-render of the template. But the setup function itself will never fire again. It only fires that one time. And if you are, I'm not covering this in the talk today, but if you are a React developer and you're really comfortable with JSX, instead of using a Vue template up here, you can just return JSX instead of the values. If you return a function here, you can do a render function. You could use JSX within Vue. You can get the full experience of what you're used to and still get the benefits of using Vue if that's what you want to do. That's not going to be a typical use case, but it's something you can do. So at this point, we're going to start extracting the logic to do an example of the to-dos from their components itself and into a separate hook. So the first thing we're going to do is create a hooks folder, somewhere to store that. You can call it whatever you want, mix-in, utils, hooks. I like hooks because, as people are saying in the chat, this is very similar to React hooks. Mentally, it makes sense to me. You can also call it composables. I've seen that one fly around when talking about composition API. So we're going to say use todo.js, and we're going to start putting that together. And the first thing we're going to do is go to our component, I'm looking at my notes, so give me one moment, I apologize. So we're going to import ref and computed from Vue, because those will be pieces we specifically need for this. Going to import use store from Vuex, and then we just create a function, use to do. And if you're a React dev, this looks very familiar already. We're just not importing React. So const store equals use store, const new to do text equals ref. It helps if you spell const correctly. And then const show completed is also a ref, in this case a false. And we'll just start here and return those values. So new to do text, and my keyboard is blowing up on me, and show completed. Great. So right now, this is a very boring hook. All we're doing is creating a couple values and then returning them. This doesn't have any huge benefit. But what we can do, let's go over to our home page, where we've got this logic here of to-dos and to-do count and completed to-do count. And we're just going to pull all of that into our hook, because maybe we need to show those totals somewhere else, and we would just have to replicate that logic. That's kind of the thinking here. So now we have the to-dos and the to-do count and completed to-do count all right here, and we can just return them as well. So to-dos, to-do count, and completed to-do count. I guess we should export default use to-do. That way, everything is working as expected. So we've just pulled all those out. We're not going to take out the logout handler because that's not a feature of to-dos. That's a feature of the application. So we don't need to worry about that. We will take out our computed here because we're no longer importing it. We're also no longer showing completed from here. So that's all of that. Now let's bring in our new hook. Import use to do from, and that is in hooks use to do. So instead of all of the logic living in here, we can just do const, see what we need, show completed to-dos, completed to-do count, and to-do count, not from store.state. We're going to go from use to do. And there we go. So now our logic is living outside of our view component. We have extracted that, and we're just importing it just like you would with a mixin and using it within this component. So as our application grows, if we need to access the completed to-do count on another page, let's say we added a histogram or something of how well we're completing our to-dos, we can now access that data using the same logic, but it's in an external file. We can just bring it in. We don't have to start copying, pasting between components, or we don't need to create very specific components that we intend to try and reuse in multiple places. It's very easy to reuse logic with the composition API. That's really its intent. So that is our first example. Joseph just asked, what VS Code extension are you using to show those messages inline? That is an excellent question. Let me double check what that is. I believe it is this one, Error Lens. Yep, Error Lens is what I'm using, improve highlighting of errors. So it shows them to me all in line, which I would imagine is a little annoying on your side. I'm sorry, but I really enjoy it while I'm working so that I can very visually see what's going wrong instead of just a little underline as I'm going. So at this point, we will go to our add to do. And add to do is very simple. It's got the new to do text and the add to do handler. And we can just take this and put it right here. I'm not sure when you would need to add your to do from a different component, but let's put that logic all in the same place just to be safe. And now we're going to return add to do handler. We're going to import use to do from hooks use to do. We don't need the store anymore because the store is not being used for anything except that one function. The function isn't happening here anymore, so we don't need it. And then we just need const new to do text and add to do handler equal to use to do. We also don't need ref. So again, all of our logic has been extracted from the component. It's in a single location if we need it in multiple places. I just think this is a really huge benefit of the composition API. So if you're putting together your logic based against a Vuex store and you need to combine a few different things, you want some easier to use methods than use store would provide, then you can wrap them and do them this way. Our last piece will be the to-do component itself, where we were doing this. Oh, I forgot to show off our logging here. So let's add a to-do. And we're going to check it. Toggling to-do, hooray. Removing to-do. So we can see that the effects that we were expecting to happen are happening. We're about to remove those. So that's why I wanted to show that real quick. So instead of const store equals uStore and toggle to-do and remove to-do, we're going to put those functionalities here. And just do a copy paste. Just like that. And this will take a little bit of tweaking here because we're going from the arrow syntax to a standard function. Just like that. Hooray, now our toggle and remove are in here. And remove. And again here, we no longer need Vuex. So we're just going to import use to do. And then we're going to get them here. Toggle to do, remove to do. Oh, that's right. The prop is now not there. That's why we were going to take out the console logs. And this is why I like TypeScript and the benefits of it that are built into VS Code. Even when I'm using JavaScript, it'll tell me when I'm doing something wrong. Use to do. And then we can just return those. Toggle to do, remove to do. We don't need props anymore. So there we go. Our to-do component itself, its logic has also been extracted. So all of our to-do logic is now living within this use to do hook. And we're done. Though I suppose we could also migrate the home page a bit. Nope, we already did that. Great. So yeah, we're done. So all of our logic for to-dos is now living in this separate hook. If we needed to build like an admin dashboard for to-dos, or we wanted to build a public view to preview our to-dos, if we wanted to hold ourselves accountable to the internet at large, all of our logic for showing to-dos and displaying how many are left is in its own component. We can build different interfaces based around that logic, but the logic can be distinct. This also helps with testing if you wanted to write unit tests just against this hook, as opposed to writing a unit test against a component and then testing the logic internally. This just helps in a lot of ways. John M. is asking, how do you enable TypeScript checking? What I am using, I believe, is, like I said earlier, it's a combination of the Viter plugin and Volar. So let's pull that up. So this one is what I'm using. Come on. So Volar is the language support for Vue 3, and this includes a lot of TypeScript checking. I believe this is the one I'm using right now to get all the TypeScript checking within my Vue components. And that is right here. So I can enable and disable TypeScript checking for Vue. It's really nice to work with. If you're using a Vue 3 application, I figure it's what to do because it just provides so many benefits. If you're using a Vue 2 application, it won't work, or at least it won't work as well because it's specifically intended for Vue 3. So just keep that in mind. But it helps a lot when working with Vue. In my opinion, working with TypeScript in general, if you're using Vue, if you're using React, is very helpful to make sure you're not making any easy to catch mistakes, because you don't need to keep that mental load in your head. Super helpful tutorial. Thanks so much. You're welcome. So that is the gist of my demo today. So we now have a fully functioning app. App works with composition. There we go. And it does work, and it does use composition. And that is a bug. We won't worry about that bug right now. That's not the part of this. So we'll show our completed. Everything is working as expected at the moment. So yeah, that is my guide today to migrating an app from Vue Options API to the Composition API. Are there any other questions at this point that you would like to ask? Got a few more minutes left, so if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them. I will note, as I'm waiting for any questions, if anyone has any, on this.'s website, this.co, I've written a number of blog posts talking about each specific piece of the Composition API. So there are blog posts on ref and reactive. There are posts on computed property, the different kinds of watchers. I also go in to provide an inject if that is something that interests you. I personally feel it's a lot easier to wrap my head around using the Composition API as opposed to Options API. Not sure exactly why, it just makes a lot more sense to me, I don't know. So if you want to check those out, those are on this.co in the blogs. So if you go to the Vue section in blogs, actually I can just pull this up real quick because we're here. Because I have the internet, blog. And if we scroll down, there's a number of blogs here. I also wrote one on getting started with Tailwind, if that's something that interests you. So under the Vue section, talk about custom composable methods, which is what we were just doing. Provide and inject. The page decided to refresh. Composition API watch and watch effect. Computing application state. So there's a lot of interesting things to read that I've been writing about Vue, as well as other developers at this.labs. Feel free to check those out as well. Had to refresh to see chat is current. Oh, yeah, the chat can be interesting sometimes. Hope you were enjoying the talk regardless. And if any of you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. I am on Twitter at Lindsay K. Wardell. Also on GitHub at Lindsay K. Wardell. Also have my website at Lindsay K. Wardell. All of my blog posts can also be found there. They link back to this dot. So feel free to check any of those resources out. My links here decided not to format properly today. That figures. But this link here will take you to the actual application that we were working on. So that's Lindsay at github.com/LindsayKWardell/JSM-composition. And then if you go to jsm-composition-api.netlify.app, you can get to the slides that you have been watching with me today. Granted, the slides are not super interesting. The app is what's really cool, but feel free to check those out and reach out if you have any questions. I'm also the host of Views on Vue, and I appear on the Modern Web podcast as well. Happy to talk, happy to have discussions and have any conversations that you would like to have on either of those shows. So thank you all for participating in JS Marathon. And like we said earlier, see you again at the next one. And like I said, feel free to reach out. Have a great day, everybody.